All right, let's jump right into this explainer and uncover a history that is honestly just truly revolutionary. We so often think of the four great Sunni imams merely as jurists, right? Or just the founders of legal schools. But the historical sources paint a profoundly different picture. These four men were revolutionaries. They were incredibly honorable, deeply just scholars of high character who completely refused to be intimidated. They absolutely weren't slaves to money, prestige, fear, worldly promises, or cheap pleasures. Instead, they stood completely unbowed in the face of some unimaginable political terror. So the whole core conflict of this era really boils down to two totally opposing worlds. On one side, you've got the political authorities, the caliphs and the governors, and their cause was absolute control. They desperately needed a monopoly on religious legitimacy to justify their rule and force strict ideological uniformity on the public. But on the other side, the Imams. Their cause was fighting for independent knowledge, the absolute rule of law, and true freedom of conscience. They totally refused to let the state manipulate religion for a political power grab. To really grasp this struggle, we're going to look at four historical heavyweights. First up, Abu Hanifa. Then Imam Malik. Third, Imam Shafi'i. Fourth, Ahmad bin Hanbal. And finally, we'll unpack the massive legacy of the Unbowed. Here is the ultimate irony, right? The state literally had all the armies and the wealth, but they were absolutely terrified of these scholars. Why? Well, because these imams held immense social power. They had the hearts of the people. If an imam rejected a state appointment, it basically stripped the government of its religious legitimacy overnight. Add in the toxic jealousy of rivals, state-sponsored scholars, and you have a total powder keg where independent thinkers were viewed as literal threats to the empire. Part 1. Abu Hanifa, a life extinguished in the dungeon, the pioneer of resistance. Living right through that incredibly bloody transition between the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties, Abu Hanifa was a brilliantly successful merchant. And because of that, he funded his own students so they could remain completely independent from the government. He was a real man of action. He actually openly supported rebellions led by the family of the Prophet against the harsh, oppressive policies of the caliph. So, to trap him, the caliph offered him the ultimate religious position, chief judge of Baghdad. And his refusal? It was a massive, direct challenge to the establishment. Like we said, he wasn't a slave to money or fancy titles. He knew full well that accepting that chief judge position meant signing off on the state's brutality. It meant becoming a royal puppet. His absolute refusal proved that his character simply could not be bought at any price. But man, the state's retaliation was horrific. He was thrown into a dark Baghdad dungeon and whipped 10 times a day. Our sources even indicate that the caliph eventually forced him to drink poison. Yet it is honestly heartbreaking but so inspiring to realize that this brilliant mind spent his final days teaching his students right through the bars of a prison cell before his life was tragically extinguished at the age of 70. Part 2. Imam Malik, the whipped voice of Medina, standing firm in the Prophet's city. Now, Imam Malik was a man of just immense dignity. His entire life was deeply rooted in the Prophet's mosque in Medina. He compiled this absolute masterpiece of early Islamic law called Al-Muwatta. But get this, the caliphs were desperate to make this very book the mandatory, exclusive law of the land, to force ideological uniformity. And Imam Malik bravely refused. He argued that different regions had inherited different traditions. He literally stood up to the sheer force of the state just to protect the diversity of thought. But, true independence comes with a heavy price. Malik issued a legal ruling stating that oaths made under coercion were totally invalid. Well, the state saw this as a massive threat because they were constantly forcing the public to swear loyalty to the caliph under the threat of violence. For daring to undermine their brute force, the governor had Malik arrested and subjected to a horrific public whipping. He was beaten so severely that his shoulder actually dislocated. And yet, even while being literally brutalized, his unparalleled character just shines right through. Instead of submission or anger, he offered a prayer of forgiveness for his tormentors. He actually suffered from severe illness in his later years because of this, but he kept it totally private out of sheer dignity until he passed away at the age of 86. Part 3. Imam Shafi'i, Exile and Chains, the Bridge Between Traditions. So Imam Shafi, he was this incredibly brilliant synthesizer of Islamic law who actually studied under the students of Abu Hanifa and then directly under Imam Malik. Despite rising from total poverty in Gaza to holding a government post in Yemen, his profound sympathy for the oppressed got him in major trouble. The governor falsely accused him of organizing a political rebellion in support of the Zaydis. He was arrested, bound in heavy iron chains, and forced to march for 2 agonizing months all the way to Baghdad to face trial. Picture this. He is literally standing in chains in front of the most powerful man in the world, Caliph Harun al-Rashid, right alongside 9 companions who were executed right in front of him. No way out, right? But Imam Shafi relied entirely on his own intellectual brilliance, his incredibly eloquent self-defense, and the crucial intervention of his peers to survive and secure a pardon. After miraculously escaping death, he eventually settles down in Egypt, and despite a lifetime of relentless harassment from political authorities and violent attacks from sectarian fanatics, his final moments at age 54 were filled with a profound, peaceful reliance on his faith. He never, not once, compromised his integrity just for his own safety. Part 4. Ahmad bin Hanbal and the Mihna, the ideological inquisition. All right, this brings us right to the climax of this whole historical struggle. Under Caliph al-Ma'mun, the state attempted a massive, and I mean massive, thought homogenization operation known as the Mihna. They mandated that all scholars adopt a very specific theological view, that the Quran was a created text. Why? Well, because if the text was created, then the caliph had the ultimate authority to alter or interpret it however he pleased. Ahmad bin Hanbal became the ultimate symbol of resistance against this. He endured years in a dark dungeon and literal skin-tearing torture rather than hand the state a monopoly on freedom of conscience. Part 5. The legacy of the Unbowed, the origin of civil society. So let's tie all this together. When you look at it generation after generation, these imams just completely stared down the absolute power of the state. Look at the massive personal price they paid for this. Prison, whipping, poison, chains, and a literal inquisition. And for what pretexts? Refusing to be a state puppet, protecting the public from forced oaths, sympathizing with the oppressed, and resisting state-mandated theology. They suffered it all just to protect the independent rule of law. So, in the end, who really won? The state had the swords, they had the treasuries, they had the dungeons, but the imams, they had the hearts of the people. The massive, unprecedented public turnouts at their funerals, I mean, sometimes numbering in the hundreds of thousands, a literal sea of people, proved a timeless truth. True legitimacy cannot be forced by a whip. It is earned through character, honor, and an absolutely unyielding commitment to justice. As we wrap up this explainer today, I really want to leave you with a question to chew on. These were incredible men whose knowledge simply did not bow at the Sultan's door. So, how does the blood, the dignity, and the freedom spent by these unbowed intellectuals inspire your own understanding of independence? How do we stand up for what is truly right today? Thank you so much for joining me on this powerful journey.